The smell of garlic and rosemary filled the dining room as my daughter Cassandra carved into a perfect prime rib roast, the juices running pink and rich across her expensive china. My son Derek was already reaching for seconds, his wife Nicole laughing at something he whispered, while their children attacked loaded baked potatoes with the enthusiasm only kids can muster. The chandelier cast a warm glow over the mahogany table I'd helped them buy 3 years ago, and for a moment, I almost forgot about the Tupperware container sitting in front of me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Almost. The container held what Cassandra had cheerfully called, "Your portion, Mom," when I'd arrived for Sunday dinner. Inside were the dried-out edges of last week's meatloaf, some wilted green beans, and mashed potatoes that had clearly seen better days. The same leftovers I'd been eating every Sunday for the past 6 months, while my children and their families feasted on restaurant-quality meals that I was somehow always too late to enjoy. I watched Derek cut another thick slice of beef, the meat so tender it practically fell apart under his knife, and something cold settled in my stomach. Not hunger, though I was hungry. Something else. Something that tasted like realization. My name is Verda Simpson, and at 72 years old, I thought I knew my children pretty well. I raised Derek and Cassandra as a single mother after their father walked out when they were 10 and 8, working double shifts at the textile factory, and cleaning offices on weekends to keep food on our table and clothes on their backs. I wasn't perfect, but I was present. I was the one who sat through every parent-teacher conference, every soccer game, every piano recital that Derek quit after 2 months because he said the keys were too hard to press. When Derek graduated from business school, I took out a second mortgage on my little house to help him start his consulting firm. When Cassandra needed money for her wedding to that investment banker who turned out to be worth every penny I'd worried about spending, I cashed in my retirement fund early and paid the penalties with a smile. When they both bought houses in the same upscale neighborhood and needed help with down payments, I sold my mother's jewelry and handed over checks without asking for receipts or IOUs, or even a thank you that lasted longer than the time it took to deposit the money. I told myself I was investing in their happiness. I told myself that's what mothers do. But sitting there that Sunday evening, staring at reheated leftovers while my son's family devoured a meal that cost more than my weekly grocery budget, I started to wonder if I'd been telling myself the wrong story for a very long time. The conversation flowed around me like I wasn't there. Derek was explaining some complicated business deal to his father-in-law, who joined us for dinner and somehow raided a plate full of prime rib despite being what Cassandra usually called just extended family. Nicole was scrolling through her phone, showing pictures of the vacation they were planning to Tuscany, the one that would cost more than I'd made in my best year at the factory. Cassandra was already clearing plates, stacking them with the efficiency of someone who'd never had to worry about breaking something she couldn't afford to replace. Nobody asked if I was finished eating. Nobody asked if I wanted more. Nobody seemed to notice that I was sitting at their table like a guest who'd overstayed her welcome, picking at food they'd already decided wasn't worth their time. I excused myself to use the bathroom, more to escape the sound of their laughter than because I needed to go. The hallway was lined with family photos, professional portraits that had cost hundreds of dollars each. I was in some of them, standing slightly apart from the main family groups, smiling the way you do when someone tells you to look happy for the camera. In the more recent photos, I wasn't there at all. When I came back to the dining room, Derek was passing around his phone, showing off pictures of the new boat he and Nicole had bought. A 30-foot cabin cruiser that he'd mentioned, wanting for years but never seemed to have the money for, until now, apparently. "Mom, you should see this beauty," he said, sliding the phone across the table to me. "We took her out last weekend. The kids love it." I looked at the gleaming white boat bobbing in some marina I didn't recognize, probably an hour's drive from the little apartment I'd moved into after selling my house to help with their down payments. The boat had to have cost $60,000, maybe more. I tried to remember the last time Derek had asked about my finances, about whether I was comfortable in the new place, about whether I needed help with anything at all. I couldn't. "It's beautiful," I said, handing the phone back, because what else was I supposed to say? That the boat cost more than I'd see in Social Security payments for the next 3 years? That I was eating leftovers while he was buying toys? Cassandra returned from the kitchen with a tray of dessert, individual chocolate lava cakes that were clearly from some expensive bakery. She set one in front of each person at the table, counting carefully. When she reached my spot, she paused. "Oh, Mom, I'm sorry, I forgot to get you one. There's some ice cream in the freezer if you want." She said it so casually, so matter-of-factly that for a second I thought I'd misheard her. But no, there it was. 7 people at the table, 6 desserts, and the person who got left out was the one who'd been eating reheated leftovers all evening. I looked around the table, waiting for someone to offer to share, waiting for Derek to suggest we cut the cakes in half, waiting for any acknowledgement that what had just happened was not normal or acceptable. But everyone was already digging into their desserts, making appreciative sounds about the molten chocolate centers and the perfect presentation. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor I'd helped them afford. "I think I'll head home," I said. "Already?" Cassandra looked up, a forkful of cake halfway to her mouth. "But we haven't had coffee yet." "I'm tired," I said, which was true. I was tired in ways that had nothing to do with sleep. Derek didn't look up from his dessert. "Drive safe, Mom, thanks for coming." Thanks for coming. Like I was a neighbor who'd stopped by unannounced. Not the woman who'd sacrificed her financial security to give them the lives they were now living without me. I gathered my purse and coat, said goodbye to the grandchildren who barely looked up from their phones, and walked out into the October evening air. The drive home took 20 minutes, through neighborhoods that got progressively smaller and shabbier, until I reached the complex where I now lived. Garden View Apartments, which had neither gardens nor views, just a parking lot full of dented cars and a pool that had been drained for maintenance since I'd moved in 8 months ago. My apartment was on the 2nd floor, a 1-bedroom unit with thin walls and thinner carpet. It was clean and functional, and nothing like the house I'd lived in for 30 years, the house where I'd raised my children and hosted their friends, and kept a guest room ready for anyone who needed it. That house had 3 bedrooms and a backyard where Derek had learned to ride his bike, and Cassandra had planted sunflowers that grew taller than she was. I'd sold it without a second thought when they needed help with their down payments. At the time, downsizing had seemed practical, even liberating. Less space to clean, lower utility bills, no yard work. I'd convinced myself I was simplifying my life. Now, sitting on my secondhand couch in a living room, barely big enough for a coffee table, I realized I'd simplified myself right out of my own story. I made a cup of tea and sat by the window, looking out at the parking lot where someone's car alarm was going off and nobody seemed to care enough to turn it off. The sound was irritating but somehow fitting, like the soundtrack to my Sunday evening realization that something was very, very wrong with the life I was living. I thought about the prime rib dinner, about the casual way Cassandra had handed me leftovers, about Derek's new boat and Nicole's vacation plans, and the chocolate lava cakes that hadn't included one for me. I thought about the second mortgage I'd taken out to help Derek's business, money I was still paying back at 72 years old. I thought about Cassandra's wedding, the dress that cost more than my car, the reception I'd paid for while sitting at a table in the back corner because the good seats were reserved for immediate family. I thought about all the times I'd written checks and emptied accounts and cashed in investments because my children needed help, needed opportunities, needed a leg up in a world that I'd convinced myself was harder for them than it had been for me. And I thought about the last time either of them had asked how I was doing. Really asked, not the quick, "How are you, Mom?" that they tossed out while texting or watching television or doing anything else that was more important than listening to my answer. I couldn't remember. The tea was getting cold in my hands, but I kept holding the cup because it was warm, and because the alternative was admitting that I was sitting alone in a too small apartment wondering when I'd become the kind of person who got leftover food at her own children's dinner table. I'd been telling myself for months that things would get better, that Derek's business was just hitting some rough patches, that Cassandra was just busy with the kids and her job and her perfect life. I'd been telling myself that the distance I felt was temporary, that family dynamics were complicated, that maybe I was being too sensitive or expecting too much. But sitting there in the dark, with the car alarm finally silent and the parking lot empty except for shadows, I started to wonder if I'd been telling myself stories to avoid facing a truth I wasn't ready to handle. The truth was that my children were living well. Very well. They had expensive homes and new cars and boats and vacations and designer clothes for their kids and wine that cost more per bottle than I spent on groceries in a week. They had everything they'd ever wanted, everything I'd helped them achieve, everything I'd sacrificed my own security to provide. And they were treating me like an inconvenience. Not maliciously, necessarily. Not with deliberate cruelty. But with the kind of casual indifference that was somehow worse than outright hostility. Because it suggested that my presence or absence in their lives didn't matter enough to warrant strong feelings either way. I was an afterthought. A leftover person getting leftover attention and leftover food at the edges of lives I'd made possible. The realization should have made me angry, but instead it made me curious. If this was how they treated me now, when I was healthy and mobile, and still able to contribute to their lives in small ways, what would happen when I wasn't? What would happen when I needed help instead of being able to provide it? I had a feeling I already knew the answer, and it didn't involve prime rib. I finished my tea and went to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. Instead, I lay in the dark listening to my upstairs neighbor's television and thinking about numbers. The mortgage I was still paying on a house I no longer owned, the retirement fund I'd cashed out early, the savings account I'd emptied, the jewelry I'd sold, the life insurance policy I'd borrowed against. I started adding it up in my head, all the money I'd given them over the years. Not loans, because loans implied the expectation of repayment. Gifts, I'd called them. Investments in their futures. Help when they needed it most. The number was larger than I'd expected. Much larger. Somewhere in the six figures, if I was being honest about it. Maybe more. If I counted the interest I'd paid on loans I'd taken out to help them, the penalties I'd paid for early withdrawals, the opportunities I'd missed because my money was tied up in their dreams instead of my own. I'd been so focused on making sure they had everything they needed that I'd forgotten to make sure I would be okay when I needed things too. And now here I was, 72 years old, living in a one-bedroom apartment, eating leftovers at my children's table while they discussed vacations I'd helped pay for, and bought boats with money they'd somehow managed to accumulate, despite needing my help with every major purchase they'd made as adults. Something wasn't adding up. The math didn't work. People who needed constant financial assistance from their elderly mother shouldn't be able to afford luxury vacations and recreational vehicles. People who claim to be struggling shouldn't be serving prime rib dinners while handing their mother reheated meatloaf, unless they weren't struggling. Unless they'd never been struggling, at least not the way I'd thought. Unless I'd been funding a lifestyle instead of helping with necessities. Unless they'd been taking advantage of my love for them and my willingness to sacrifice my own security for their comfort. The thought was so uncomfortable that I tried to push it away, but it kept coming back, insistent and ugly and impossible to ignore. Because once I started really looking at their lives, really paying attention to what they had and how they lived, the story I'd been telling myself about struggling young adults who needed their mother's help started to fall apart. They weren't struggling, they were thriving. They were living better than I ever had, better than most people ever would. And they were doing it, at least partially, with money I'd given them while living on Social Security and eating leftovers. I got up and made another cup of tea, this time adding a shot of the brandy I kept for special occasions. If this wasn't a special occasion, I didn't know what was. The brandy burned a little going down, but it also warmed something in my chest that had been cold for longer than I cared to admit. I sat back down by the window and started thinking about what I knew and what I could find out, and what I might do with the information once I had it. Because if my children were living well on money I'd given them while treating me like an inconvenience at their dinner table, then maybe it was time for some inconvenient truths to come to light. Maybe it was time for some consequences. Maybe it was time for them to learn what it felt like to deal with leftovers when the prime rib ran out. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. The brandy was gone from my system, but the resolve it had helped me find was still there. Sharp and clean and surprisingly strong. I made coffee and toast and sat at my small kitchen table with a yellow legal pad I'd found in a drawer. At the top of the first page, I wrote what I've given them and underlined it twice. Then I started remembering. Derek's business loan. I'd taken out a second mortgage for $25,000. The loan payments were still coming out of my checking account every month. Would be for another 4 years. Cassandra's wedding. $38,000 from my retirement fund. I had paid the penalty for early withdrawal and lost the compound interest I would have earned over the next decade. Derek's house down payment, $15,000 from the sale of my mother's engagement ring and wedding china. Cassandra's house down payment, $22,000 from my savings account, money I'd been setting aside for home repairs and medical emergencies. Derek's car when his old one died, $8,000 for a reliable used vehicle that turned out to be a 2-year-old BMW. Cassandra's kitchen renovation, $12,000 because the original kitchen was just impossible to work in. Various smaller amounts over the years. Birthday money for the grandchildren that somehow always ended up being much more than I'd planned. Christmas gifts that escalated every year. Help with utility bills and car repairs and medical expenses and school fees and summer camps, and a dozen other things that had seemed reasonable at the time. By the time I finished writing, the number at the bottom of the page was so large it made me dizzy. $137,000. I stared at the figure for a long time, checking my math, making sure I hadn't missed anything or added something twice. But no, the number was right. Over the past 8 years, I'd given my children the equivalent of more than 2 full years of my Social Security income, and they were serving me leftovers. I made a second cup of coffee and started a new page. This one I titled, What They Have Now. Derek's house, a 4-bedroom colonial in Maple Heights, the kind of neighborhood where people hired landscaping services and drove cars that cost more than I'd made in my best year at the factory. Market value, probably around $400,000. Derek's cars, the BMW I'd helped him buy, plus Nicole's Range Rover and a motorcycle he'd mentioned buying last spring. Derek's boat, the 30-foot cabin cruiser I'd seen pictures of the night before. Derek's business. Whatever it was worth, it was apparently doing well enough to support all of the above, plus regular vacations and expensive dinners out. Cassandra's house, a 5-bedroom Tudor in the same neighborhood as Derek's place, with the renovated kitchen I'd paid for and a pool they'd installed last summer. Cassandra's cars, a Mercedes SUV and her husband's Tesla.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Cassandra's lifestyle. Private school for the kids, designer clothes, yearly family vacations to places like Hawaii and Europe, a housekeeper who came twice a week. The contrast was so stark it was almost funny. Almost. I'd given them enough money to buy a nice house outright, and they were living like millionaires while I was living in a 1-bedroom apartment eating reheated food. But what really bothered me wasn't the money itself. Money was just money, and I'd given it freely, with love, because I wanted them to have good lives. What bothered me was the realization that they'd had good lives all along. They'd been doing fine, probably better than fine, and they'd let me believe they were struggling. They'd let me sacrifice my own security to fund luxuries they could have afforded on their own. They'd been treating my generosity like an entitlement, and my presence like an inconvenience. I was still thinking about this when my phone rang. The caller ID said it was Cassandra. "Hi, Mom," she said when I answered. "I just wanted to make sure you got home okay last night. You left so suddenly." "I got home fine," I said. "Good. Listen, I wanted to ask you something. The kids need new winter coats, and you know how expensive everything is these days. I was wondering if you might be able to help out. Maybe a couple $100s?" I looked down at the legal pad in front of me, at the number at the bottom of the page that represented 8 years of my financial sacrifice. "Winter coats," I said. "Right. They grow so fast, and the good ones are really pricey. But you know how cold it gets, and I want to make sure they're warm enough." I thought about the prime rib dinner, about the chocolate lava cakes, about the vacation photos and the new boat and the casual way she'd handed me leftovers while her children ate restaurant-quality food. "How much do winter coats cost these days?" I asked. "Well, if you want ones that will actually keep them warm, you're looking at maybe $150 each. So $300 total for both kids. $300. More than I spent on groceries in a month. For coats for children whose parents drove cars worth more than most people's annual salaries." "I'll have to think about it," I said. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Think about it." "Yes, think about it." "But Mom, it's for the kids. They need warm coats." I'm sure they do. And I'm sure their parents can afford to buy them. Another pause, longer this time. Is everything okay? You sound different. I'm fine, I said. I just need to think about it. Okay, she said, but her tone had changed. Less warm, more cautious. Well, let me know. Soon, though, because the weather's changing, and I want to get them before the good ones are gone. After she hung up, I sat looking at the phone for a long time. It was the first time in years that I'd said no to a request for money, and it felt strange. Not bad exactly, but unfamiliar. Like I'd forgotten that no was an option. I spent the rest of the morning making phone calls. First, to my bank, to get exact balances on all my accounts and copies of statements going back 5 years. Then to the mortgage company, to find out exactly how much I still owed on the second mortgage I'd taken out for Derek's business loan. Then to my financial advisor, the one I hadn't spoken to since I'd cashed out my retirement fund for Cassandra's wedding. By lunchtime, I had a complete picture of my financial situation, and it was worse than I'd thought. I had $11,000 in my checking account, most of which would go to monthly expenses. I had $4,300 in savings, which sounded like more than it was until I remembered that I was 72 years old and had no other resources if something went wrong. I still owed $18,000 on the second mortgage, payments that would continue for another 4 years unless I could pay it off early. My total net worth was less than what I'd given each of my children individually. At 72, I was essentially broke. Not poverty-level broke, but close enough that an unexpected medical bill or major car repair could put me in serious trouble. And I'd gotten there by giving away my financial security to children who were now living better than I ever had. The irony would have been hilarious if it hadn't been so terrifying. I made myself a sandwich for lunch, the kind of simple meal I'd been eating more often lately because it was cheap and filling and didn't require much thought. While I ate, I found myself thinking about my mother, who died 10 years earlier at the age of 86. She'd lived through the Depression, had understood scarcity in ways my generation never really had to. She'd saved every penny she could, had been almost obsessive about not wasting anything, had kept emergency funds hidden in different places around her house because she never fully trusted that the banks would be there when she needed them. I thought she was being paranoid, maybe a little silly, with her coffee cans full of quarters and her insistence on buying generic brands and her refusal to eat at restaurants because you never know what they're charging you for. But she'd died with money in the bank and a house that was paid off and enough saved up that she never had to worry about being a burden to anyone. She'd taken care of herself until the very end, had maintained her independence and her dignity and her ability to help others when she chose to. I'd been so busy helping my children that I'd forgotten to help myself. I'd been so focused on making sure they didn't struggle that I'd set myself up to struggle instead. And the worst part was that they didn't seem to notice or care. They'd gotten so used to my help that they expected it, took it for granted, assumed it would always be there when they needed it. Well, maybe it was time for them to learn that assumptions could be wrong. I finished my sandwich and opened my laptop, the old one I'd bought used 3 years ago when my even older one finally died. It took forever to boot up, but eventually I was online, looking up information I should have researched years ago. I looked up Derek's business, the consulting firm I'd helped him start with my second mortgage money. According to the website, they had 12 employees and offices in 2 cities. The client list included some major corporations I recognized. The testimonials talked about innovative solutions and significant cost savings and results that exceeded expectations. It didn't look like a struggling business to me. It looked like a successful one. I looked up property values in Maple Heights, the neighborhood where both my children lived. The average home price was well above the national median, and properties were selling quickly, often above asking price. It was exactly the kind of area where successful professionals lived when they were doing well for themselves. I looked up the private school Cassandra's children attended. Tuition was $15,000 per year per child. For 2 kids, that was $30,000 annually, just for elementary school. I looked up the boat Derek had shown me pictures of. A 30-foot cabin cruiser like his started at around $60,000 new, assuming he'd bought it used. If he'd bought it new, it could have cost twice that. I looked up vacation packages to Tuscany, the trip Nicole had been showing pictures of at dinner. For a family of 4, staying in decent hotels and flying business class, they were looking at spending at least $8,000, probably more. By the time I closed the laptop, I had a pretty clear picture of how my children were living. They were living very, very well. Better than 90% of American families. Better than I'd ever lived, even when I was working full-time and had a husband contributing to the household income. And they were doing it while taking money from their elderly mother, who was living in subsidized housing and eating leftovers. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. Not just angry at them, but angry at myself for being so naive, so trusting, so willing to believe that successful adults in their 40s somehow needed constant financial help from their mother who was living on Social Security. I had been played. Not maliciously, maybe, but completely. They'd figured out that I was an easy mark, that all they had to do was mention a need or express a worry about money, and I'd open my checkbook without asking uncomfortable questions about how they could afford everything else they had. They'd been treating me like a bank. A bank that never checked credit scores or asked for collateral or required proof of hardship. A bank that handed out money with no expectation of repayment and no questions asked about what the money was really being used for. Well, this bank was about to change its policies. I spent the rest of the afternoon going through my files, looking for every record I could find of money I'd given them over the years. Bank statements, canceled checks, receipts, emails, where they'd asked for help and I'd agreed to provide it. I made copies of everything and organized it chronologically, creating a paper trail that told the story of 8 years of financial generosity that had been repaid with casual indifference and leftover food. By evening, I had 3 thick folders full of documentation. One for Derek, one for Cassandra, and one for my lawyer, because I was starting to think I might need one. I wasn't sure yet what I was going to do with all this information, but I knew I was going to do something. I was done being the leftover person at the edge of lives I had made possible. I was done being treated like an inconvenience by children who'd been living off my sacrifice while pretending they were struggling. I was done being taken advantage of. It was time for my children to learn that every choice has consequences, and that the choice to treat your mother like a second-class citizen while living off her generosity was about to have some very expensive consequences indeed. I just had to figure out exactly what those consequences were going to be. The phone rang again Tuesday morning while I was having my coffee and reviewing the financial documents I'd spread across my kitchen table. This time it was Derek. "Hey Mom, quick question. Nicole's sister is getting married next month, and we need to fly out to Portland for the wedding. The flights are pretty steep this time of year, and with everything else going on, we're a little tight. Could you maybe help us out with airfare? We're looking at about $1,200 for the 4 of us." I stared at the bank statements in front of me, at the evidence of 8 years of financial manipulation disguised as family assistance. $1,200 for airline tickets to attend a wedding. Not food, not shelter, not medical care. A social event. $1,200, I repeated. I know it sounds like a lot, but you know how expensive flying is these days, especially with the kids. And Nicole really wants to be there for her sister. "Derek, can I ask you something?" "Sure, what's up?" "How much did your boat cost?" There was a pause. "My boat? Why are you asking about that?" "I'm curious. You showed me pictures Sunday night, and it looked expensive." "Well, it wasn't cheap, but we got a good deal. Found it through a guy Nicole knows at work. Why does it matter?" "How much, Derek?" Another pause, longer this time. "I don't see what that has to do with anything." Humor me. $58,000. "But Mom, we saved for years for that boat. It's not like we just went out and bought it on a whim." $58,000. I looked down at my bank statement, at the balance that represented every penny I had in the world. $58,000 was more than 4 times my total savings. It was more than my entire annual income from Social Security. "You saved for years," I said. "That's right, we were very disciplined about it. But you need me to pay for your airline tickets. That's completely different." The boat was a planned purchase. This is unexpected. Derek, weddings don't happen unexpectedly. People plan them months in advance. Nicole's sister didn't wake up last week and decide to get married next month. Okay, fine, we knew about the wedding. But we didn't budget for it. Because we didn't think we'd be able to go. Now Nicole really wants to be there, and we're just asking for a little help with the travel costs. From your mother, who lives in a one-bedroom apartment and drives a 12-year-old car. What's gotten into you? You're acting really strange lately. I almost laughed. Strange. I was acting strange because I'd finally started paying attention to what was actually happening in my life, instead of what I'd been telling myself was happening. I'm not going to give you money for airline tickets, Derek. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought the call might have dropped. You're not? No, I'm not. But why? You always help us when we need it. Always. Like it was a law of nature, like gravity or the sunrise. Like my financial assistance was something he could count on, regardless of his own circumstances or mine. Maybe that's the problem, I said. What problem? Mom, I don't understand what's happening here. Are you upset about something? Derek, you own a $58,000 boat. You live in a $400,000 house. Your wife drives a car that costs more than I've ever made in a year. And you're asking your elderly mother, who lives on Social Security, to pay for your vacation travel. It's not vacation travel, it's family. It's a choice. You can choose to go or choose not to go. You can choose to pay for your own tickets or choose to ask someone else to pay for them. But you can't choose to make it my responsibility. I'm not making it your responsibility. I'm asking for help. What's the difference? He didn't have an answer for that. Or if he did, he wasn't sharing it with me. Fine, he said finally. We'll figure something else out. I'm sure you will. But I want you to know this really puts us in a difficult position. Derek, you own a boat that costs more than most people make in a year. If you're in a difficult position, it's not because you can't afford $1,200 for airline tickets. He hung up without saying goodbye. I sat there holding the phone for a moment, surprised by how calm I felt. I'd expected to feel guilty or worried about damaging our relationship. Instead, I just felt clear. Like I'd been looking at everything through a dirty window for years and had finally wiped it clean. An hour later, my phone buzzed with a text message from Cassandra. Derek said you wouldn't help with their flights. What's going on? Are you okay? They were talking about me. Comparing notes. Trying to figure out why their reliable source of funding had suddenly started asking questions. I texted back, I'm fine. Just being more careful with my money. She called immediately. Careful with your money? Mom, what does that mean? It means I'm 72 years old and I need to think about my own financial security. But you've always been generous with us. It's not like we're asking for huge amounts. Cassandra, in the past 8 years, I've given you and Derek a total of $137,000. Silence. That can't be right. I have all the records. Bank statements, canceled checks, receipts. $137,000. But that wasn't gifts. That was help when we needed it. That was family helping family. And now I need help. I need to keep my money so I can take care of myself. You're not taking care of yourself by being selfish. Selfish. The word hit me like a slap. I was being selfish by keeping my own money, by choosing not to fund their lifestyle choices, by refusing to continue sacrificing my security for their convenience. Cassandra, you spent $38,000 on your wedding. I cashed out my retirement fund to pay for it. We didn't ask you to do that. You didn't stop me either. You took the money, had your perfect wedding, and never once asked if I could afford it. You said you wanted to help. I did want to help. But helping your children when they're struggling is different from funding their luxuries when they're living better than you are. We're not living better than you. We have mortgages, we have expenses, we have kids to support. You have a housekeeper. What does that have to do with anything? I clean my own apartment, Cassandra. I buy generic groceries and clip coupons and turn the heat down at night to save money. You have someone else clean your house twice a week while you drive a Mercedes and your kids go to private school. Those are investments in our future. What about my future? What about my investment in my own security? She didn't answer that either. Mom, I think you're overreacting. Maybe you should talk to someone, like a counselor or something. This isn't like you. A counselor. Because there had to be something wrong with me if I'd stopped being an unlimited source of funding for their lifestyle choices. What would be like me, Cassandra? Continuing to give you money I can't afford while you serve me leftovers at your dinner table? That was one dinner. You're making it sound like we treat you badly all the time. When was the last time you invited me to do something that didn't involve me giving you money or babysitting your children? Another silence. We're busy, Mom. We have full lives. But that doesn't mean we don't care about you. How do you show that you care? We invite you to family dinners, where you give me reheated leftovers while everyone else eats prime rib. You're never going to let that go, are you? I'm never going to pretend it didn't happen. She sighed dramatically. Fine, I'll talk to Derek. Maybe we can figure out some way to include you more. But you have to stop this thing about money. It's making everything weird. Include me more. Like I was a distant relative. They occasionally remembered to invite to gatherings. Not the woman who'd made their comfortable lives possible. The money thing isn't weird, Cassandra. What's weird is that you think it's normal to take financial help from someone who has less than you do. We don't have more than you do. We have debt. Debt you used to buy luxuries. They're not luxuries, they're necessities. A boat is not a necessity. The boat is Derek's, not mine. Private school is not a necessity. Good education is absolutely a necessity. A Mercedes is not a necessity. Reliable transportation is a necessity. We could have gone on like that for hours, with her redefining every luxury as a necessity and every choice as an obligation. But I was tired of arguing with people who'd convinced themselves that needing help was the same thing as deserving it. I have to go, I said. Mom, wait. Let's not fight about this. Can't we just go back to the way things were? The way things were. Where I gave them whatever they asked for, and they treated me like a minor character in their major lives. No, I said. We can't. After I hung up, I made myself lunch and thought about the conversations I just had. Both of my children had reacted to my refusal to give them money with confusion, frustration, and ultimately, a kind of entitled anger that told me everything I needed to know about how they really saw our relationship. I wasn't their mother to them. I was their bank, a resource they'd learned to manage and manipulate to fund the lifestyle they wanted to live. They'd gotten so comfortable with my generosity that they'd stopped seeing it as generosity at all. It had become an expectation, a right, something they could count on and plan around and take for granted. And when I'd threatened that expectation by asking questions and setting boundaries, they'd responded not with understanding or gratitude for what I'd already given them, but with irritation that I was changing the rules of a game they'd been winning for years. Well, the rules had changed, the game was over. And it was time for them to learn what it felt like to live within their actual means, instead of their means plus whatever they could get from me. That afternoon, I drove to the library and spent 3 hours using their computers to research things I should have looked into years ago. I pulled up property records for both of their houses, tax assessments, mortgage information that was part of the public record. I looked up Derek's business registration, his client list, his employees. I researched the private school Cassandra's children attended, the country club they belonged to, the vacation destinations they posted about on social media. By the time I left the library, I had a clearer picture of their actual financial situation, and it was nothing like the picture they'd been painting for me. Derek's house was worth more than $400,000, and his mortgage was less than $200,000. He had substantial equity, the kind of equity that qualified him for credit lines and refinancing options and all sorts of financial flexibility that people with actual money problems didn't have. His business was not only successful, it was expanding. He'd hired 3 new employees in the past year and opened a second office. The client testimonials on his website talked about cost savings in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. This was not a struggling startup. This was a thriving company. Cassandra's situation was even more revealing. Her husband worked for an investment firm, where his position title suggested he was making well into 6 figures. Their house was worth nearly $500,000, and they'd refinanced twice in the past 5 years, pulling cash out each time for improvements that had included the kitchen renovation I'd paid for. They weren't struggling. They weren't even close to struggling. They were managing their money poorly, spending everything they made and then some, but their income levels put them in the top 20% of American earners. They'd been crying poor to their elderly mother while living like the wealthy people they actually were. The discovery should have made me angrier. But instead, it just made me more determined. If they wanted to live beyond their considerable means, that was their choice. But they were going to do it without my money. I drove home and spent the evening going through my financial records again, this time with a different purpose. Instead of documenting what I'd given them, I was calculating what I needed to secure my own future. The numbers were sobering. At 72, with limited savings and no retirement fund, I needed to be extremely careful with every dollar I had. The second mortgage I was still paying on Derek's business loan was costing me $312 every month. The early withdrawal penalties I'd paid when I cashed out my retirement fund had cost me thousands in taxes and lost compound interest. I'd given away my financial security to fund the lifestyle choices of people who didn't need my help and didn't appreciate my sacrifice. But it wasn't too late to change course. I was 72, not 92. If I was careful, if I stopped bleeding money to support other people's luxuries, I might be able to rebuild at least some financial stability for my remaining years. The first step was obvious. No more money for anyone, for any reason, no matter how they asked or what they claimed to need it for. The second step was harder to think about, but necessary to consider. I needed to find out if there was any legal way to recover some of what I'd given them. I'd been calling it gifts, but gifts implied that the giver could afford the giving. I'd been calling it family assistance, but assistance implied temporary help for people who were genuinely struggling. What I'd actually been doing was funding the lifestyle inflation of successful adults who'd learned to view their mother as a supplemental income source. Some of the money I'd given them had been documented as loans, at least in my own records. I'd kept copies of emails where they'd asked for temporary help and promised to quote, pay it back as soon as things get better. Things had obviously gotten better, but the payments had never materialized. Maybe it was time to remind them of their promises. I spent the next morning drafting letters. Not angry letters, not accusatory letters, just business-like correspondence that laid out the facts as I understood them. The letter to Derek was straightforward. A list of every financial transaction between us over the past 8 years, with dates and amounts and copies of the documentation I had. At the bottom, I included a simple statement. Several of these transactions were described as temporary loans to be repaid when your financial situation improved. Based on your recent purchases and lifestyle, it appears your situation has improved considerably. Please let me know when you plan to begin repayment. The letter to Cassandra was similar, though her list of transactions was longer and included more items that had been explicitly described as loans rather than gifts. I didn't send the letters immediately. Instead, I put them in envelopes and left them on my kitchen counter while I thought about what I was really trying to accomplish. I didn't expect to get the money back. People who were comfortable taking financial help from their elderly mother while living better than she did weren't the kind of people who honored their debts without legal pressure. What I wanted was for them to understand that their actions had consequences. That treating me like an inconvenience while living off my generosity was not acceptable. That viewing my financial assistance as an entitlement rather than a sacrifice had damaged our relationship in ways that couldn't be fixed with apologies or promises to include me more. I wanted them to realize that they'd been taking advantage of my love for them, and that the advantage taking was over. But more than anything, I wanted them to feel some of the financial pressure I'd been living with, while they'd been living without a care in the world on money I couldn't afford to give them. I wanted them to learn what it felt like to live within their actual means. I wanted them to experience the kind of budgeting and sacrifice and careful decision-making that I'd been doing, while they'd been buying boats and taking vacations and sending their kids to private school. I wanted them to understand that money had to come from somewhere, and that the somewhere had been my security, my peace of mind, my ability to take care of myself in my old age. But most of all, I wanted them to learn that actions have consequences, and that the consequences of treating your mother like a second-class citizen while living off her sacrifice were about to become very expensive indeed. On Thursday morning, I mailed the letters. By Thursday afternoon, my phone was ringing. Derek called first, his voice tight with anger. "What the hell is this invoice you sent me?" "It's not an invoice, Derek. It's a record of financial transactions between us. You're asking me to pay you back for help you gave me years ago. I'm asking you to honor the agreements you made when you asked for that help. What agreements? You offered to help us. You said it was what families do for each other. I said that about some of the money. Other amounts were specifically described as loans. I don't remember agreeing to any loans. I have copies of your emails asking for temporary help and promising to pay it back. Silence. You kept copies of my emails? I keep records of my financial transactions, Derek. It's what responsible people do. This is insane. You can't just decide years later that gifts were actually loans. I'm not deciding anything years later. I'm reminding you of what we agreed to at the time. Even if some of it was supposed to be loans, you know we can't pay that kind of money back all at once. I'm not asking for it all at once. I'm asking for a repayment plan. We don't have room in our budget for loan payments to you. I almost laughed. No room in their budget for loan payments, but plenty of room for boats and vacations and private school tuition. Then you'll need to make room, I said. By doing what? We're already stretched thin. Derek, you bought a $58,000 boat 6 months ago. That's completely different. How is it different? That was a planned purchase. We saved for it. Then you can save to pay back the money you owe me. I don't owe you anything. Families don't loan money to each other and then demand it back with interest. I'm not charging interest, Derek. I'm asking for the principal on loans you agreed to repay. The conversation went on like that for another 10 minutes, with Derek alternating between claiming he didn't remember agreeing to any loans and insisting that even if he had, family obligations superseded financial agreements. He hung up without agreeing to any kind of repayment plan. Cassandra called an hour later. Mom, what are you doing? Derek is furious. Derek is furious because he doesn't want to pay back money he borrowed. You can't be serious about this. You're talking about destroying our family over money. I'm not destroying anything, Cassandra. I'm asking you to honor your commitments. What commitments? You gave us that money freely. Some of it I gave freely, some of it you asked to borrow. Even if that's true, you know we can't afford to pay it back right now. Why not? Because we have expenses. We have obligations. What obligations? The mortgage, the car payments, the kids' school, insurance, all the normal things people have to pay for. And vacations to Europe, and housekeepers, and private tennis lessons for the children. Those aren't luxuries, Mom. Those are investments in our family's future. What about my future, Cassandra? What about it? Don't you think I deserve to have some financial security in my old age? Of course you do. But that doesn't mean you get to retroactively turn gifts into loans just because you're worried about money. I'm not worried about money. I don't have money. There's a difference. You have Social Security. You have savings. I have very little savings because I gave most of my money to you and Derek. That was your choice. Your choice. Like I'd decided to impoverish myself for fun. Like it hadn't been a sacrifice motivated by love and concern for their well-being. It was my choice to help when I thought you needed help, I said. It wasn't my choice to fund your lifestyle while you treated me like an inconvenience. We don't treat you like an inconvenience. Last Sunday you served me leftovers while everyone else ate prime rib. Oh my God, you're still on about that dinner? It was one meal, Mom. You're acting like we abuse you or something. How often do you call me just to see how I'm doing? We're busy. We have jobs and kids and responsibilities. How often do you invite me to do things with you that don't involve babysitting or giving you money? We invite you to family events, where I sit at the children's table and eat food you didn't think was good enough for your other guests. That's not how it was. That's exactly how it was. She was quiet for a moment, and I thought maybe I was getting through to her. But when she spoke again, her voice had hardened. Fine. You want to play hardball over money? Let's talk about money. You're living in subsidized housing and driving a car that's older than my youngest child. Maybe instead of demanding money from us, you should think about making better financial decisions for yourself. Subsidized housing. My apartment wasn't subsidized, just small and affordable. But she'd thrown that out there like an insult, like I should be ashamed of living within my means. My financial decisions have been fine, Cassandra. My financial mistake was giving away money I couldn't afford to give to people who didn't need it and didn't appreciate it. We appreciated it. Show me how. What do you mean, show you how? Show me one way you've demonstrated appreciation for the $137,000 I've given you over the years. We always said thank you, and then asked for more money the next month. Because we needed help. No, you didn't. You wanted help. There's a difference. The conversation ended with her promising to discuss a repayment plan with her husband, but I could tell from her tone that she had no intention of paying back anything. Like Derek, she'd convinced herself that family assistance was a one-way street, that accepting help created no obligations for the person receiving it. They were both about to learn otherwise. That evening, I did something I hadn't done since Aaron's funeral. I called my sister Ruth in Phoenix. We hadn't talked much over the years, partly because of distance and partly because Ruth had never been shy about expressing her opinions regarding my financial generosity toward my children. Well, she said when she heard my voice. To what do I owe this unexpected pleasure? I need some advice. About what? About Derek and Cassandra. What have they done now? I told her everything. The years of financial assistance, the recent dinner where I'd been served leftovers, the discovery of their actual wealth, the letters I'd sent demanding repayment of loans. Ruth listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Verda, she said finally, I've been waiting 8 years for you to wake up. What do you mean? I mean, I've been watching you bankrupt yourself to support 2 ungrateful children who were perfectly capable of supporting themselves, and every time I tried to say something about it, you told me I didn't understand. They seemed to need help. They seemed to want money. There's a difference, and you were too loving to see it. So what do I do now? Now you stop giving them money and see how long it takes them to stop calling. They're my children, Ruth. Are they? When was the last time either of them treated you like their mother instead of their personal ATM? I couldn't answer that question because I wasn't sure I knew the answer. Look, Ruth continued, you want my advice? Here it is. Stick to your guns. Don't give them another penny, no matter what sob story they come up with. If they want a relationship with you that isn't based on money, they'll figure out how to have one. If they don't, then you'll know where you really stood with them all along. But what if they cut me out of their lives? Honey, it sounds like you're already cut out of their lives. You're just paying for the privilege of being ignored. Ruth's words stung because they were true. I was paying for the privilege of being treated like a second-class citizen in my own children's lives. So you think I should demand the money back? I think you should do whatever makes you feel like you're taking control of your own life again. Whether that's demanding repayment or just cutting off the money pipeline, that's up to you. But stop letting them walk all over you while you pay them for the privilege. After I hung up with Ruth, I sat in my small living room and thought about everything that had happened over the past week. A week ago, I'd been a woman who ate leftovers at her children's table and wrote checks whenever they asked. Now I was someone who'd said no, who'd demanded accountability, who'd stopped accepting scraps of attention from people who'd been living off my sacrifice. It felt strange, but not bad. Like I'd been holding my breath for years and had finally remembered how to exhale. My phone buzzed with a text message from Derek. Talked to Cassandra. We think you should see someone about this obsession with money. It's not healthy. An obsession with money. Because wanting to keep enough of my own money to survive was an obsession. I texted back, my obsession is with being treated with respect by my own children. When you're ready to discuss repayment plans, let me know. He didn't respond. But 20 minutes later, Cassandra texted, you're destroying our family. I typed back, you destroyed our family when you decided I was worth less than the leftovers on your dinner table. I'm just stopped paying you to treat me that way. Then I turned off my phone and went to bed. Tomorrow, I was going to start figuring out exactly how much leverage I had in this situation and how to use it to get back some of what they'd taken from me. Because if they thought this was just about money, they were wrong. This was about respect. This was about dignity. This was about a mother who'd finally realized that love shouldn't cost everything you have, and that family obligations worked both ways. This was about teaching my children that actions have consequences, even when those actions involved taking advantage of someone who loved them more than she loved herself. And the lessons were just beginning. Friday morning brought an unexpected visitor to my apartment. I was washing dishes when I heard the knock, and when I opened the door, Nicole was standing in the hallway holding a coffee tray from some expensive shop downtown. "Hi, Verda," she said with a smile that looked rehearsed. "I thought you might like some company this morning." Nicole had never visited me before. In the 8 years she'd been married to Derek, she'd been to my apartment exactly 0 times. She knew where I lived, but she'd never shown any interest in seeing how I actually lived. "This is unexpected," I said, stepping aside to let her in. I know. I've been meaning to visit more often. Derek's always saying we should spend more time together." She looked around my small living room, and I could see her taking inventory. The second-hand furniture, the generic artwork I'd bought at a discount store, the television that was older than her youngest child. "Derek sent you," I said. "Well, he mentioned that you two had a misunderstanding about some money matters, and I thought maybe we could clear the air. Woman to woman. A misunderstanding. That's what they were calling it now. Would you like to sit down?" I offered, gesturing toward my small couch. Nicole perched on the edge of the cushions like she was afraid of getting comfortable. She handed me one of the coffees, some complicated drink with multiple adjectives in the name that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a day. "Verda, I want you to know that Derek feels terrible about the way your conversation went yesterday. He's really stressed about work right now, and I think he may have come across as more defensive than he meant to." I sipped the expensive coffee and waited for her to get to the real reason she was here. "The thing is, we're both a little confused about this loan situation. Derek doesn't remember agreeing to any formal loan arrangements, and honestly, we've always thought of your help as family support, not business transactions. I have copies of the emails where he asked for temporary help and promised to pay it back when his business got on its feet." Nicole's smile flickered slightly. "Right, but you know how people talk when they're asking for help. They say things like, 'I'll pay you back,' because it makes them feel better about accepting assistance, not because they're entering into a legal contract. So promises don't mean anything if they're made to family members? That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that maybe there was some miscommunication about expectations." I set down my coffee and looked at her directly. "Nicole, how much did Derek's boat cost?" She blinked, clearly not expecting the question. "I don't see how that's relevant." "Humor me. It was a significant purchase, but we saved for a long time to afford it." "How long?" "I don't remember exactly. A couple of years, maybe." So while Derek was saving for a boat, he was also borrowing money from his mother for his business expenses. Those were 2 completely different things. Were they? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like Derek was using my money to cover his business costs, so he could use his own money to save for luxury purchases. Nicole's carefully composed expression started to crack. "Verda, I think you're misunderstanding how our finances work." "Then explain it to me." She shifted uncomfortably on the couch. "Well, it's complicated. We have multiple income streams and various expenses, and sometimes the timing doesn't line up perfectly. When Derek asked for help with the business, it was because he had temporary cash flow issues, not because we couldn't afford our lifestyle. Cash flow issues that allowed him to save for a boat at the same time. The boat savings were separate. From what? From the business expenses. Nicole, money is money. If Derek had $58,000 available to buy a boat, he had money available to cover his business expenses without borrowing from his elderly mother." She was quiet for a moment, and I could see her trying to figure out how to spin this in a way that made sense. "Look," she said finally, "maybe there were some mixed signals about repayment expectations, but you have to understand that we're not in a position to pay back large sums all at once. We have a mortgage, car payments, the kids' expenses, everything that goes with raising a family. And a boat payment? We paid cash for the boat, with money you could have used to pay me back." Nicole's smile was completely gone now. "Verda, I came here hoping we could work this out amicably. Derek values his relationship with you, and we don't want money issues to come between you." "Derek values his relationship with my checkbook," I said. "I'm not sure he's ever valued his relationship with me." That's not fair. Isn't it? When was the last time Derek called me just to see how I was doing? When was the last time he invited me to do something with him that didn't involve babysitting his children or giving him money? Nicole didn't answer. When was the last time you invited me to your house for a meal where I got the same food as everyone else? The leftover thing again? Verda, that was a misunderstanding. Cassandra was trying to make sure there was enough food for everyone. By giving me reheated leftovers while everyone else ate prime rib? Maybe the portions weren't perfectly equal, but that doesn't mean it was intentional. Nicole, there were 7 people at that table and 6 prime rib dinners. The math isn't complicated. She stood up abruptly. I can see that you're determined to be upset about every little thing. I was hoping we could have a reasonable conversation about this, but you seem more interested in holding grudges than in maintaining family relationships. I'm interested in being treated like a member of the family, instead of like a source of funding. Fine. I'll tell Derek you're not interested in working things out. Tell Derek I'm very interested in working things out. I'm interested in working out a repayment schedule for the money he borrowed from me. Nicole gathered her purse and headed for the door. You know, Verda, Derek has done very well for himself, despite some early setbacks. His business is successful now, and we're building a good life for our family. I think you'd be proud of that instead of trying to tear it down over money. I am proud of Derek's success, I said. I just think he should pay for it himself instead of making his mother pay for it. After Nicole left, I sat in my quiet apartment and thought about the conversation. She'd come here on a reconnaissance mission, trying to figure out how serious I was about the loan repayment demands and whether I could be talked out of my position with appeals to family harmony and guilt about disrupting their lives. What she'd discovered was that I was completely serious and that guilt wasn't going to work on me anymore. I spent the rest of the morning researching debt collection laws and small claims court procedures. I wasn't ready to take legal action yet, but I wanted to understand my options if negotiations continued to go nowhere. The information was enlightening. Even informal loans between family members could be legally enforceable if there was documentation of the agreement and evidence that the money had been transferred. I had both. I had emails where Derek and Cassandra had asked for temporary help and promised repayment, and I had bank records showing the transfers. I also discovered that in my state, I could file claims for up to $15,000 in small claims court without needing a lawyer. That wouldn't cover everything they owed me, but it would be a start. More importantly, small claims court cases were public record. Derek's successful business and Cassandra's husband's investment firm career could both be affected by public documentation of their refusal to repay debts to an elderly family member. I wasn't vindictive, but I wasn't stupid either. If they wanted to play hardball, I had options they might not have considered. My phone rang around noon. This time it was Cassandra, and she sounded angry. Nicole told me about her visit this morning. She said you were completely unreasonable. I was completely clear about what I expect. Mom, this is getting out of hand. You're talking about destroying relationships over money that you gave us willingly, some of which you agreed to pay back. Even if that's true, you can't just demand it all at once. We have obligations. So do I, Cassandra. I have an obligation to myself to have enough money to live on in my old age. You have plenty of money. I have $15,000 in total savings. At 72 years old, that's not plenty of money. That's barely enough to cover an emergency. You have Social Security. Social Security covers my basic living expenses. It doesn't cover medical emergencies or home repairs or anything unexpected. The money I gave you was supposed to be my emergency fund. Then why did you give it to us? Because I thought you needed help, and I thought you'd pay back what you agreed to pay back. We were planning to pay it back eventually. When? When we could afford it. Cassandra, you can afford it now. You're living better than most people ever will. You have a housekeeper, and drive a luxury car, and send your kids to private school. You're not struggling financially. We have expenses. Everyone has expenses. Most people manage to pay their debts anyway. Most people don't have family members trying to collect on gifts. Most people don't take advantage of their elderly parents' generosity, while treating them like second-class citizens. There was a long pause before Cassandra spoke again, and when she did, her voice had changed. colder, more calculated. Mom, I've been talking to some people about this situation, and they're concerned about your mental state. My mental state? This obsession with money, the paranoid thinking about family relationships, the sudden personality change. These can be signs of early dementia or other cognitive issues. I felt like I'd been slapped. You think I have dementia because I want to be paid back for loans? I think you're not thinking clearly about this situation. Maybe you should see a doctor, get checked out. There are medications that can help with these kinds of behavioral changes. Cassandra, my behavior hasn't changed. My tolerance for being taken advantage of has changed. That's exactly the kind of thing someone with cognitive issues would say. The manipulation was breathtaking. When guilt and appeals to family loyalty hadn't worked, she was moving on to questioning my mental competence. If she could convince people that I was suffering from dementia or some other cognitive decline, she could discredit my financial claims and potentially even challenge my legal capacity to make decisions about my own money. Are you threatening to have me declared mentally incompetent? I asked. I'm suggesting that you might benefit from professional evaluation for your own good. And if I refuse, then we'll have to consider what other options we have to protect you from making decisions that aren't in your best interest. Protect me by taking away my right to control my own finances, presumably so they could continue to access them without interference from my inconvenient desire to be repaid for loans. Cassandra, let me be very clear about something. I am not suffering from dementia or any other cognitive impairment. I am a 72-year-old woman who finally realized that her children have been taking financial advantage of her for years. If you want to pursue guardianship proceedings based on my refusal to continue funding your lifestyle, go ahead. But I think you'll find that courts require actual evidence of incapacity, not just disappointment that your elderly mother stopped writing checks. We're not disappointed. We're worried. You're worried about losing access to my money. We're worried about you. If you were worried about me, you wouldn't have served me leftovers while everyone else ate prime rib. If you were worried about me, you'd ask how I'm doing instead of asking for money. If you were worried about me, you'd want to make sure I had enough financial security to take care of myself instead of trying to guilt me into giving you more of what little I have left. Mom, please, can't we just go back to the way things were? The way things were wasn't working for me, Cassandra. It was only working for you. Fine. If that's how you want to play this, then that's how we'll play it. But don't expect us to keep pretending that everything is normal between us. I stopped expecting that when you made it clear that I wasn't worth the same dinner as everyone else at your table. She hung up without saying goodbye. I sat there holding the phone, shaking slightly from the adrenaline of the conversation. The dementia threat was new, and it was serious. If they could convince a doctor or a court that I was mentally impaired, they could potentially gain control over my finances and my life. It was a nuclear option, but given how much money was at stake, I couldn't rule out the possibility that they'd try it. I needed to protect myself. I needed documentation that I was mentally competent and making rational decisions about my own money. I needed witnesses to my cognitive state and my financial situation. I made an appointment with my doctor for the following week. I was going to get a complete cognitive evaluation, not because I thought I needed one, but because I wanted official documentation that I was mentally sound when I made the decision to stop funding my children's lifestyle. I also called Ruth again. They're threatening to have you declared incompetent, she said when I explained the situation. Jesus, Verda. How far are they willing to go to keep their hands in your pocketbook? Apparently, pretty far. Well, you're not incompetent. You're the sanest you've sounded in years. Finally standing up for yourself instead of letting them walk all over you. But what if they actually try it? What if they find some doctor who'll say I'm not capable of making my own financial decisions? Then you fight it. You get your own doctor, your own evaluation, your own legal representation. And you document everything they've been doing to take advantage of you. No court is going to look at their behavior and conclude that you're the one with the problem. I hope you're right. I am right. But Verda, you need to be prepared for the possibility that this is going to get ugly. If they're willing to threaten your mental competency to keep access to your money, they're probably willing to do other things too. Like what? Like cutting you out of their lives completely. Like turning the grandchildren against you. like making sure everyone in the family knows their version of this story before you get a chance to tell yours. I hadn't thought about the grandchildren. Derek's kids barely knew me anyway, but Cassandra's children had always been friendly when I babysat them. If Cassandra told them that Grandma was trying to take money away from their family, that Grandma was sick and saying mean things about their parents, how long would it take before they stopped wanting to see me at all? So what do? You do what you've been doing. You stand your ground, you document everything, and you don't let them gaslight you into thinking that wanting to be treated with respect is somehow wrong or crazy. That afternoon, I drove to an office supply store and bought a small digital recorder. If my children were going to continue having conversations with me about this situation, I was going to have records of exactly what was said. If they were planning to claim that I was mentally incompetent, I wanted proof of their attempts to manipulate and intimidate me. I also stopped by my bank and made copies of all my financial records for the past 10 years. If this ended up in court, I wanted to have complete documentation of my financial situation and the transfers I'd made to my children. The bank manager, a woman about my age named Patricia, noticed the large stack of copies I was making. "Doing some financial planning?" she asked. "Something like that," I said. Then, on impulse, I added, "Can I ask you a question? If someone had been giving money to family members for years, and some of that money was described as loans that were supposed to be paid back, would the bank have any record of that?" "Well, we'd have records of the transfers, but not necessarily the terms. Although if the transfers were described in the memo lines or if there was email correspondence through our online banking system, that might be documented." I hadn't thought about memo lines. I pulled out my phone and logged into my online banking account, scrolling back through years of transfers to Derek and Cassandra. Most of them had generic descriptions like transfer to Derek or help with down payment. But some of them, especially the more recent ones, had more specific notations. Business loan temporary, read one transfer to Derek for $8,000. Kitchen renovation will pay back, read a transfer to Cassandra for $12,000. Car repair loan, read another transfer to Derek for $3,000. Patricia looked over my shoulder at the phone screen. "Those memo lines could be useful if you ever needed to document the nature of the transfers," she said carefully. "Useful how?" "Well, they show your understanding of the transactions at the time you made them. If there was ever a dispute about whether money was a gift or a loan, those notations might be relevant." I thanked Patricia and finished making my copies. When I got home, I spent the evening going through my online banking records and printing out screenshots of every transfer that had loan-related language in the memo line. By the time I was finished, I had documentation of over $40,000 in transfers that were clearly described as loans rather than gifts. It wasn't the full amount I'd given them, but it was a substantial sum that they'd agreed to pay back and then apparently forgotten about once their financial situations improved. Sunday morning brought another unexpected visitor. This time, it was my grandson, Tyler, Derek's oldest boy. He was 16 now, old enough to drive, and he stood on my doorstep looking uncomfortable and rehearsed. "Hi, Grandma," he said. "Can I come in? I wanted to talk to you about something." I let him in and offered him something to drink. He accepted a soda and sat on my couch, fidgeting with the can. "Tyler, this is a nice surprise. I don't think you've ever visited me here before." "Yeah, well, Dad thought maybe I should come by and see how you're doing." Dad thought. Of course. "How am I doing with what?" Tyler looked even more uncomfortable. "He said you've been having some problems lately. Like, maybe getting confused about some things?" I felt a surge of anger that Derek would involve his teenage son in this manipulation, but I kept my voice calm. "What kind of confusion? Like maybe thinking that money he gave you was supposed to be paid back or something?" He said sometimes older people get mixed up about things like that. "Money he gave me." Derek had told his son that he had given me money, not the other way around. "Tyler, what exactly did your father tell you?" "He said you were upset because you thought he owed you money, but that it was actually money he'd been giving you to help with your living expenses. and that you were getting confused and thinking it was the other way around. The breathtaking audacity of the lie left me speechless for a moment. Derek hadn't just denied owing me money. He'd completely reversed the narrative, telling his son that he'd been supporting me financially instead of the truth, which was that I'd been supporting him. Tyler, how much do you know about your father's business? I know he has a consulting company and it's doing really well. He's been expanding and hiring more people. And how much do you know about my financial situation? Tyler shifted uncomfortably. Dad said you've been having trouble making ends meet since you moved to this apartment. He said that's why he's been helping you with money. Tyler, your father has never given me money. Not once. Ever. In your entire life. But he said, your father has borrowed over $60,000 from me over the past 8 years. I have bank records, I have emails, I have documentation of every transfer I made to help him build his business and buy your house, and cover various expenses when he claimed to be struggling financially. Tyler stared at me, confusion clear on his young face. That can't be right. Dad said you were confused. I got up and retrieved the folder of financial documents I'd been organizing. I sat back down next to Tyler and opened it to show him the bank statements, the transfer records, the emails, where Derek had asked for temporary help and promised repayment. This is a transfer I made to your father for $8,000 to help with his business expenses, I said, pointing to one of the statements. The memo line says business loan, temporary. That means he was supposed to pay it back. Tyler looked at the documents, his face growing more troubled with each page. Here's another one, I continued. $12,000 for your car when your old one broke down. The memo line says car loan, will repay. That was 2 years ago. Has your father ever mentioned paying me back for your car? No, Tyler said quietly. He never said anything about owing you money for anything. That's because he's been pretending that all the money I gave him was a gift, even when he specifically asked to borrow it and promised to pay it back. I showed Tyler several more transactions, each one clearly documented as a loan rather than a gift. By the time I was finished, he looked sick. Grandma, I don't understand. Why would Dad tell me the opposite of what really happened? Because he doesn't want to pay back the money he owes me, and he's hoping that if he can convince people I'm confused or mentally impaired, he won't have to. But that's lying. Yes, Tyler. That's lying. He sat quietly for a long moment, looking at the documents spread out on my coffee table. Grandma, are you really okay? Like mentally? Tyler, does anything about this conversation suggest to you that I'm confused or mentally impaired? No, he said immediately. You seem totally normal. Actually, you seem more focused than usual. That's because I am more focused. I'm focused on not letting your father and aunt take advantage of me anymore. But why would they do that? Why would they take money from you if they didn't really need it? That's a very good question, Tyler. When you figure out the answer, maybe you can explain it to me. Tyler left a few minutes later, taking with him copies of some of the loan documentation that I'd made for him. I wasn't trying to turn him against his father, but I wasn't going to let Derek use him to spread lies about my mental state without giving him access to the truth. That evening, Derek called. He was furious. What the hell did you say to Tyler? He came home asking all kinds of questions about money I supposedly owe you. I showed him the documentation of the loans you've taken from me over the years. You had no right to involve him in this. You involved him when you sent him here to spread lies about my mental state. I didn't send him to spread lies. I sent him to check on you because we're worried about you. Derek, you told your son that you've been giving me money to help with my living expenses. That's not concern, that's fraud. It's not fraud, it's protecting him from having to worry about family financial issues that don't concern him. It becomes his concern when you use him to deliver a message based on lies about what's actually happening. I'm not lying about anything. You're the one who's confused about this situation. Derek, I have documentation of every penny I've given you. I have emails where you asked for temporary help and promised to pay it back. I have bank records with memo lines describing the money as loans. I have a complete paper trail that proves you've been borrowing money from me for years and conveniently forgetting to pay it back. Even if some of that money was described as loans, you know we can't afford to pay it back right now. You can afford a $58,000 boat. That's completely different. How? Because that was a planned purchase that we saved for. Derek, if you can save $58,000 for a boat, you can save money to pay back your mother for the loans that made it possible for you to have that boat in the first place. You're being unreasonable. I'm being realistic. I'm 72 years old with limited savings. Because I've been supporting your lifestyle for years, I need that money back so I can take care of myself. Fine. You want to destroy our family over money? Go ahead. But don't expect things to go back to normal between us. Derek, things haven't been normal between us for years. I just finally stopped pretending otherwise. He hung up, and I sat in my apartment thinking about how quickly the conversation had deteriorated. Derek wasn't even pretending anymore that he intended to pay back the loans. He'd moved straight to threats about destroying our family relationship. As if our relationship hadn't already been destroyed by years of him treating me like a source of funding rather than his mother. The next morning I called a lawyer. The attorney I found specialized in family financial disputes, and she agreed to see me that afternoon. Her name was Margaret Chen, and she was probably in her 50s, with the kind of calm competence that suggested she'd seen every variation of family financial drama. I brought all my documentation, the bank records, the emails, the transfer statements, the memo line screenshots. Margaret reviewed everything carefully, asking occasional questions about dates and circumstances. Mrs. Simpson, she said when she finished reviewing the documents, you have an excellent case for loan recovery. The documentation is clear, the amounts are substantial, and the paper trail shows a pattern of borrowing with promises of repayment. So they do owe me the money? Based on what you've shown me, yes. The emails requesting temporary help combined with the bank transfer memo lines describing the money as loans create a clear record of debt obligations. What are my options for collecting? Several. We can start with demand letters, formal legal notices that they have 30 days to respond with a repayment plan. If they don't respond or refuse to negotiate, we can file suit in small claims court for amounts up to $15,000 per defendant. For larger amounts, we'd need to file in circuit court. What about their threats to have me declared mentally incompetent? Margaret's expression hardened. That's a very serious threat, and it's also likely to backfire on them. Courts don't look favorably on people who try to challenge their creditors' mental competency as a way to avoid paying debts, especially when the creditor is a family member who's been providing financial support. So you think I should move forward with legal action? I think you should start with the demand letters and see how they respond. Sometimes formal legal communication is enough to motivate people to negotiate in good faith. If that doesn't work, we'll escalate. I left Margaret's office feeling more confident than I had in weeks. I had legal options, I had documentation, and I had an attorney who believed my case was strong. More importantly, I had finally stopped being the kind of person who accepted scraps of attention from people she'd been supporting financially for years. I was done being the leftover person in my children's lives. It was time for them to learn that some debts can't be avoided forever, and some consequences can't be negotiated away with manipulation and lies. The reckoning they'd been avoiding was about to begin. The demand letters went out on a Wednesday morning in November, delivered by certified mail to both Derek and Cassandra's homes. Margaret had drafted them in the precise, formal language that lawyers use when they mean business, but the content was simple enough. 30 days to respond with a concrete repayment plan for documented loans totaling $67,000, or face legal action. I spent that Wednesday afternoon at my doctor's office, undergoing the comprehensive cognitive evaluation I'd scheduled. Dr. Martinez had been my physician for 12 years, and she seemed puzzled by my request for the testing. Verda, you seem sharp as ever to me. Is there something specific that's concerning you? My children are suggesting I might be having cognitive issues because I've been asking them to repay money they borrowed from me. Dr. Martinez raised an eyebrow. They think asking for loan repayment is a sign of dementia? They think it's a sign that I'm not thinking clearly about family financial arrangements. I see. Well, let's run the full battery of tests and put that question to rest. 3 hours later, I walked out of the medical center with a clean bill of mental health and a formal letter stating that I showed no signs of cognitive impairment, dementia, or any other condition that would affect my ability to make sound financial decisions. The letter was detailed, professional, and completely destroyed any argument my children might make about my mental competency. Derek called that Friday evening. "We got your lawyer's letter," he said without preamble. "Good." Margaret was very thorough in documenting the loans. "This is insane, Mom. You're actually suing us?" "I'm giving you 30 days to propose a repayment plan. If you do that in good faith, there won't be any need for lawsuits. We can't afford to pay back that kind of money." "Derek, you bought a boat 6 months ago that cost almost as much as everything you owe me. Don't tell me you can't afford it." "The boat was different. That was a planned purchase." "Then plan to pay me back." There was a long pause before Derek spoke again, and when he did, his tone had changed from angry to calculating. "You know, Mom, if you push this legal thing, it's going to get very messy for everyone. Family finances are complicated, and there might be things that come out in court that you don't want people to know about. Such as the fact that you've been having memory issues for longer than you want to admit. Such as the possibility that some of the money you think we borrowed was actually money we were helping you manage because you weren't handling your finances well on your own." The threat was clear enough. If I pursued legal action, they were going to claim that I'd been mentally impaired when I made the loans, and that they'd actually been protecting my interests by managing my money for me. "Derek, I just had a complete cognitive evaluation done by my doctor. I have a formal letter stating that I'm mentally competent and have no signs of cognitive impairment." Silence. "You did what?" "I had myself tested. Clean bill of health, full mental competency. No memory issues, no cognitive decline, nothing that would support any claim that I wasn't capable of making my own financial decisions." The silence stretched longer this time. "Why would you do that?" "Because I knew you'd try to use my mental state as a defense against paying back the money you owe me. Now you can't." "This is unbelievable. You're really going to take us to court over money you gave us to help our families?" "Derek, you specifically asked to borrow money and promised to pay it back. I have documentation of those promises. I have bank records showing the transfers. I have everything I need to prove that these were loans, not gifts." "Fine. You want to play hardball? Let's play hardball. But don't expect us to have any kind of relationship with you after this." "Derek, we haven't had a meaningful relationship in years. I've just been bankrolling your lifestyle while you treated me like an inconvenience." He hung up without another word. Cassandra's response came in the form of a visit to my apartment Saturday morning. She brought her children with her, which immediately told me she was planning some kind of emotional manipulation. "Hi, Grandma," 8-year-old Sophie said, running to hug me. "Mom said we should come see you because you've been sad lately." I hugged Sophie and her younger brother Marcus, then looked at Cassandra over their heads. She was watching me with the expression of someone who thought she'd just played a winning card. "Kids, why don't you go explore Grandma's apartment while Mom and I talk?" Cassandra suggested. The children wandered off to examine my small living space, and Cassandra sat down across from me. "Using the grandchildren as props, Cassandra? That's low, even for you." "I'm not using them as props. I brought them because they miss you, and I thought maybe seeing them would remind you what's really important here. What's really important is that you pay back the money you borrowed from me. Mom, please. Look around you. Look at this tiny apartment. Look at your old furniture. Look at how you're living. The kids are asking why Grandma lives in such a small place when we have such a big house. What am I supposed to tell them?" "Tell them the truth. Tell them that Grandma lives in a small place because she gave most of her money to their parents to help them buy their big house." "I can't tell them that. It would make them feel guilty." "Maybe they should feel guilty. Maybe understanding that their grandmother sacrificed her own comfort to give them the life they have would teach them something about gratitude and family responsibility." Cassandra glanced toward the children, who were examining my small television with the Fascination Kids show for anything older than they are. "Mom, I'm trying to find a solution here. What if we set up a small monthly payment plan, maybe $100 a month?" I almost laughed. "Cassandra, at $100 a month, it would take you 43 years to pay back what you owe me. I'll be dead long before you finish." "Then what do you want?" "We can't just write you a check for $30,000. "Why not? You wrote a check for $12,000 to renovate your kitchen last year. That was different. That was necessary. How is a kitchen renovation necessary but paying back your mother is optional? Because the kitchen renovation was an investment in our home's value. And paying me back is an investment in your integrity. Cassandra looked frustrated. Fine. What if we could do $500 a month? For both you and Derek. For me. Derek would have to make his own arrangement. $500 a month from Cassandra would still take 5 years to pay back what she owed me, but it was a start. More importantly, it was an acknowledgement that she actually owed me money, which was more than Derek had been willing to admit. I want it in writing, I said. A formal loan agreement with a payment schedule and consequences for missed payments. You don't trust me? Cassandra, you've been taking money from me for years while treating me like a second-class citizen in your own home. No, I don't trust you. She looked stung by the directness of my response. That's not fair. We've never treated you badly. You served me leftovers while everyone else ate prime rib. One dinner, Mom. One dinner where the portions weren't perfectly equal. It wasn't about the portions, Cassandra. It was about what it represented. It was about you making it clear that I wasn't worth the same consideration as your other guests. That's not what I meant to do. But it's what you did. And it's been part of a pattern of treating me like I'm lucky to be included in your lives. Instead of recognizing that you're lucky, I've been willing to support your lifestyle. Sophie came running back over to us. Grandma, why don't you have a big TV like we do? Cassandra and I looked at each other. This was exactly the kind of question that illustrated the problem with our family dynamic. Because Grandma doesn't need a big TV, sweetheart, I said. I like my small one just fine. But Mom said you might want to come live with us so you could have nicer things. I felt my blood pressure spike. Mom said what? Cassandra had the grace to look embarrassed. I was just thinking out loud about options for the future. What kind of options? Well, you're getting older, and this apartment is so small, and maybe it would make sense for you to move in with one of us so we could take better care of you. The manipulation was breathtaking. After years of taking my money and treating me like an afterthought, now she was suggesting that I give up my independence and move in with them so they could take care of me, which would undoubtedly involve signing over any remaining assets to them for management and becoming completely dependent on their goodwill for my daily needs. Cassandra, I'm 72, not 92. I don't need to be taken care of. I need to be paid back so I can continue taking care of myself. But wouldn't it be nice to have family around? To not have to worry about managing everything on your own. I'm not worried about managing things on my own. I'm worried about not having enough money to manage because I gave it all to my children. Sophie was listening to this conversation with the intense focus that children bring to adult conflicts they don't quite understand but can sense are important. Are you and Mommy fighting about money, Grandma? We're having a disagreement about some money that Mommy borrowed from me, I said carefully. Like when I borrow money from my piggy bank and have to pay it back? Exactly like that, sweetheart. Sophie looked at her mother. Mom, you should pay Grandma back like I have to pay my piggy bank back. Cassandra's face reddened. It's more complicated than that, Sophie. Why? Because grown-up money things are always more complicated. But if you borrowed it, you should pay it back, right? That's what you always tell me. Out of the mouths of babes. An 8-year-old had grasped the fundamental principle that two adults with advanced degrees and successful careers were trying to dodge. Cassandra gathered up the children shortly after that exchange, claiming they had other errands to run. But before she left, she agreed to have her lawyer draw up a formal repayment agreement for $500 a month for 60 months. It wasn't everything she owed me, but it was acknowledgement of the debt and a legally binding commitment to pay at least part of it back. Derek's response was very different. The following Tuesday, I received a letter from a law firm I'd never heard of. Derek had hired an attorney, and they were challenging the validity of the loans on multiple grounds. According to Derek's lawyer, the money I'd given Derek had been gifts, not loans, despite the documentation I had showing otherwise. They claimed that any language suggesting repayment had been casual family conversation rather than legally binding agreements. They also suggested that I had been experiencing cognitive decline during the period when the transfers were made, making any agreements potentially invalid. Most insultingly, they claimed that Derek had actually been providing financial support to me during this period, not the other way around, and that my claims to the contrary were evidence of memory confusion or deliberate misrepresentation. Margaret Chen reviewed Derek's legal response with barely concealed disgust. "This is one of the most frivolous defenses I've seen in 20 years of practice," she said. "They're essentially claiming that black is white and hoping a judge will believe it despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. So we're going to court? We're absolutely going to court. And we're going to win. Decisively." Derek's attorney has made several serious mistakes in this response that actually strengthen our case. What kind of mistakes? First, they've claimed that Derek was providing financial support to you, but they haven't provided any documentation of money flowing from Derek to you. Bank records will show that all the transfers went the other way. Second, they've challenged your mental competency, but you have recent medical documentation proving you're cognitively sound. Third, they've claimed the loans were actually gifts, but your bank memo lines and Derek's own emails requesting temporary help prove otherwise. When will we go to court? Small claims court can usually schedule hearings within 60 days. I'll file the paperwork tomorrow. That evening, Tyler called me. He sounded upset. "Grandma, Dad told me you're suing him. Is that true?" "I'm asking the court to help me collect on loans he agreed to repay, Tyler. I gave him 30 days to work out a payment plan, and instead of negotiating, he hired a lawyer to claim he never borrowed the money in the first place." "But he did borrow it, right?" "I saw the papers you showed me." "Yes, Tyler. He borrowed it and promised to pay it back when his business was doing better. His business is doing very well now, but he's decided he doesn't want to honor his promises." "That's not right." "No, it isn't." "Grandma, can I ask you something? Are you really okay? Like, Dad keeps saying you're sick or confused or something, but you don't seem that way to me." "I'm not sick or confused, Tyler. I just had a complete medical evaluation that proves I'm mentally fine. Your father is saying I'm confused because he doesn't want to pay back the money he owes me. That's really messed up." "Yes, it is." Tyler was quiet for a moment. "Grandma, I don't think what Dad's doing is right. The papers you showed me were pretty clear that he borrowed money and said he'd pay it back. Thank you for saying that, Tyler. It means a lot to me that you understand what's really happening here. Are you still going to be my grandma even if you and Dad are fighting about this?" The question broke my heart. "Tyler, I will always be your grandma no matter what happens between your father and me. This disagreement is about money, not about how much I love you." "Good, because I was worried that if you guys went to court, I wouldn't be allowed to see you anymore." "Has someone told you that? Dad said you were trying to hurt our family and that we might need to stay away from you for a while." Derek was using his children as weapons now, threatening to cut off my access to my grandchildren unless I backed down from pursuing the money he owed me. It was emotional blackmail of the cruelest kind. "Tyler, no matter what your father says, you are always welcome to visit me or call me. I love you and your sister very much, and nothing will change that. Can I come see you this weekend?" "I would love that. I'll figure out a way to get there." After Tyler hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment and thought about how far this situation had deteriorated. Derek was now actively trying to turn his children against me to avoid paying back money he'd borrowed. He was willing to destroy family relationships, manipulate his teenage son, and lie to lawyers rather than simply honor his agreements. It confirmed what I'd been slowly realizing for months. Derek didn't see me as his mother. He saw me as a resource to be managed and manipulated for his benefit. When I'd stopped being a cooperative resource, I'd become an enemy to be defeated. The court hearing was scheduled for the first week of December. Margaret had filed claims against both Derek and Cassandra, though Cassandra's formal repayment agreement meant her case would likely be settled before trial. In the weeks leading up to the hearing, Derek's attorney tried several tactics to avoid going to court. They offered to settle for $10,000, then $15,000, then $20,000. Each offer came with the condition that I agree not to discuss the case publicly, and that I acknowledge that Derek had never actually borrowed money from me. I rejected every offer. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about truth, accountability, and the principle that promises matter, even when they're made to family members. The hearing itself was anticlimactic. Margaret presented our documentation methodically. Bank records showing transfers from me to Derek. Emails where Derek requested temporary help and promised repayment. Memo lines describing the money as loans. And Derek's own business records showing that his company had been successful during the period when he claimed to need financial assistance. Derek's attorney tried to argue that family financial arrangements were inherently informal, and that I had willingly given Derek money without expectation of repayment. But when confronted with Derek's own written promises to pay the money back, their defense collapsed. The judge was a woman in her 60s who seemed unimpressed with Derek's arguments. "Mr. Derek Simpson," she said, looking directly at him, "you're asking this court to believe that your 72-year-old mother gave you $60,000 over 8 years with no expectation of repayment, despite clear documentation showing you promised to repay the money when your financial situation improved. Your Honor, family money is different from business money. My mother wanted to help us, and we understood her assistance as family support, not formal loans. Mr. Simpson, did you or did you not send emails to your mother requesting temporary financial help and promising to pay it back when your business was more stable?" Derek's attorney whispered something to him before he answered. "I may have used language suggesting future repayment, but that was just to make my mother feel better about giving us the money. I didn't mean it as a legal commitment." The judge's expression suggested she'd heard enough. "Mr. Simpson, this court finds that you entered into loan agreements with your mother, that you received the full benefit of those loans, and that you are now attempting to avoid repayment through frivolous claims about your mother's mental capacity and deliberate misrepresentation of your own promises." She ordered Derek to pay back $37,000 in documented loans, plus court costs and attorney fees. The payment could be made over 24 months, but if he missed more than one payment, the full amount would become immediately due. Derek's face went white when the judge announced her decision. His attorney looked like he wanted to disappear. Outside the courthouse, Derek approached me while Margaret was packing up her files. "I hope you're happy," he said. "You've destroyed our family over money." "Derek, I didn't destroy our family. You destroyed our family when you decided that taking advantage of my generosity was more important than treating me with respect. This isn't over." "Yes, it is. The court has spoken. You owe me the money, and you're going to pay it back. Don't expect me to pretend everything is normal between us after this. Derek, everything hasn't been normal between us for years. I just stopped pretending it was." He walked away without another word. Cassandra's reaction to the court victory was more pragmatic. She called that evening to congratulate me and to confirm that her repayment agreement was still in place. "I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself, Mom," she said. Derek was being ridiculous about the whole thing. "And you weren't?" "I was trying to find a compromise. There's a difference. Cassandra, you spent months trying to convince me that asking for loan repayment was a sign of mental illness. I was worried about you. The change in your behavior was so sudden. The change in my behavior was that I stopped accepting crumbs of attention from people I'd been supporting financially for years. Okay, maybe we could have handled things better. But I'm handling it right now. I'm paying you back." "Yes, you are, and I appreciate that. So are we okay?" I thought about the question. Cassandra was paying me back, which was more than Derek had been willing to do voluntarily. But she was paying me back because she'd gotten legal advice that her position was weak, not because she genuinely believed she owed me the money or felt any guilt about taking advantage of my generosity. "We're better than we were," I said finally. "Whether we're okay depends on how things go from here." "What do you mean?" "I mean that paying back money you borrowed is the minimum requirement for a functional relationship, not the basis for a great one. If you want us to be truly okay, you're going to have to think about how you've been treating me and make some changes." "Like what?" "Like inviting me to dinner and serving me the same food as everyone else. Like calling me sometimes just to see how I'm doing instead of only calling when you need something. Like treating me like your mother instead of like an inconvenience you occasionally have to manage." Cassandra was quiet for a moment. "I can do that," she said finally. "I hope so. The first loan payment from Derek arrived exactly 30 days after the court hearing, paid by cashier's check with no note or communication. It was the correct amount, paid on time, but it felt more like a business transaction than a family interaction, which was fine with me. Derek had made it clear that he saw our relationship as purely transactional anyway. At least now the transaction was flowing in the right direction. Cassandra's first payment came with a handwritten note. "Thank you for all the help over the years. I'm sorry it took legal action to make me realize how much you'd sacrificed for us." It wasn't everything I wanted to hear from her, but it was a start. Tyler visited me the weekend after the court hearing, taking the bus across town without his father's knowledge or permission. He seemed older somehow, more serious, like the family conflict had forced him to grow up faster than he should have. "Dad's really mad about the court thing," he said over lunch at my small kitchen table. "I'm sure he is. He keeps saying you betrayed the family by taking him to court. What do you think, Tyler?" Tyler was quiet for a moment, picking at his sandwich. "I think maybe the family was already betrayed when Dad decided not to pay back money he borrowed from his mom." The wisdom of that statement, coming from a 16-year-old, was both heartbreaking and hopeful. Heartbreaking because Tyler had been forced to navigate adult moral complexities that shouldn't have been his burden. Hopeful because he'd navigated them with more integrity than his father had shown. "Tyler, I want you to know that none of this is your fault, and none of it changes how much I love you." "I know, Grandma. I just wish Dad had done the right thing from the beginning so we didn't have to go through all this." "So do I. Are you going to be okay now? Like, financially?" "I'm going to be much better, thanks to the court ruling. Your father and aunt will be paying me back over the next few years, which will give me enough financial security to take care of myself properly." "Good. I was worried about you living in this tiny apartment when I knew Dad had that expensive boat." Tyler understood the fundamental injustice of the situation in a way that Derek apparently never would. Derek had been comfortable living in luxury while his mother lived in reduced circumstances, but his teenage son found that arrangement morally unacceptable. "Tyler, you're going to be a good man when you grow up." "I hope so. I want to be the kind of person who pays back money I borrow." "That's a good start." 6 months later, I was sitting in my same small apartment, but it felt different now. Not smaller or shabbier, but right-sized. Appropriate. Mine. The loan payments were coming in regularly from both Derek and Cassandra. Derek's payments arrived without comment or communication, just business-like transfers on the same date each month. Cassandra's payments usually came with brief notes, updates about the kids, or comments about the weather, small attempts to maintain connection. I'd used some of the early payments to make improvements to my apartment. Nothing dramatic, but fresh paint in the living room, a new armchair that was actually comfortable, a few pieces of artwork that I'd chosen because I liked them rather than because they were cheap. More importantly, I'd opened a new savings account specifically for the loan repayments. This money wasn't going to be touched for anything except true emergencies. I was finally building the kind of financial security I should have had all along. Derek and I hadn't spoken since the day outside the courthouse. Tyler visited regularly, usually without his father's knowledge, and sometimes he brought his sister Emma. The kids seemed to enjoy having a grandmother who lived simply and focused on them when they visited, rather than one who was stressed about money and distracted by the financial demands of maintaining an expensive lifestyle. Cassandra had made some efforts to improve our relationship. She'd invited me to dinner twice, both times serving me the same meal as everyone else. She'd called a few times just to chat, without asking for money or favors. The interactions felt tentative and careful, like we were both learning how to relate to each other without the underlying dynamic of financial dependence. But the most significant change was in how I felt about myself. For the first time in years, I felt like I had agency in my own life. I had identified a problem, developed a strategy to address it, and followed through despite significant pressure to back down. I'd proven to myself that I could stand up for my own interests even when doing so was uncomfortable and difficult. I'd also learned that love and respect are not the same thing, and that giving someone everything they ask for is not the same as helping them. Derek and Cassandra had loved my money and my willingness to sacrifice my own security for their benefit. But they hadn't respected me enough to consider the cost of their requests, or to honor their promises when their situations improved. Real love would have included respect. Real family relationships would have included reciprocity. Real children would have wanted their mother to be financially secure rather than constantly worried about making ends meet. I'd spent years confusing enabling with loving, confusing being used with being needed. I'd thought that making myself indispensable through financial generosity would guarantee my place in my children's lives, but all it had done was train them to see me as a resource rather than a person. The court case had forced all of us to confront the truth about our relationships. Derek had chosen to maintain his position that he owed me nothing, and that I was wrong to expect repayment for loans. That choice told me everything I needed to know about his character and his priorities. Cassandra had chosen to acknowledge her debt and work toward repairing our relationship. That choice gave me hope that we might eventually build something healthier and more balanced. But the most important choice had been mine. The choice to stop accepting scraps of attention from people I'd been supporting financially. The choice to demand accountability and respect. The choice to prioritize my own financial security over their comfort and convenience. It had taken 72 years and a dinner of reheated leftovers while everyone else ate prime rib, but I'd finally learned that being family doesn't mean being a doormat, and that loving your children doesn't require impoverishing yourself to fund their lifestyle choices. I was still their mother, but I was no longer their bank. I was still part of their family, but I was no longer willing to accept the leftover portions of their attention and consideration. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. My phone buzzed with a text message from Tyler. "Can I come visit this weekend? I want to show you my report card." I smiled and texted back, "Of course. I'll make your favorite cookies." Some relationships were worth rebuilding. Others were worth maintaining exactly as they were, with clear boundaries and mutual respect. And some, sadly, were worth walking away from when the cost of maintaining them became higher than the benefit they provided. I'd learned to tell the difference, and that knowledge was worth more than all the money I'd ever given away. The leftovers were gone. What remained was real, honest, and sustainable. And that was more than enough. 1 year after the court hearing, I received an unexpected phone call from Derek's business partner, a man named Michael, whom I'd met briefly at a company barbecue years earlier. His voice was carefully neutral when he introduced himself, but I could hear the underlying tension. "Mrs. Simpson, I hope you don't mind me calling you directly. I got your number from Tyler. I wanted to discuss something with you about Derek's financial situation." "I'm listening," I said, though I wasn't sure where this conversation was headed. "The thing is, Derek's been struggling to make his loan payments to you and still maintain his other financial obligations. It's starting to affect the business because he's been making some questionable decisions to free up cash flow." I felt a familiar tightness in my chest, the old instinct to worry about Derek's well-being and consider ways I might help. But this time, I recognized the feeling for what it was and pushed it aside. "Michael, Derek's personal financial management isn't my responsibility. He borrowed money from me, a court ordered him to pay it back, and that's exactly what he's doing. I understand that, and I'm not asking you to forgive the debt or anything like that. I'm just wondering if there might be some flexibility in the payment schedule that could help stabilize things." "What kind of flexibility?" "Maybe stretching the payments out over a longer period, reducing the monthly amount so he has more breathing room for other expenses." I thought about Derek's boat, still moored at the marina, still costing him hundreds of dollars a month in docking fees and maintenance. I thought about Nicole's Range Rover, about the private schools, about the lifestyle they'd maintained even while claiming financial hardship in court. "Michael, has Derek considered selling his boat?" There was a pause. "I don't think that's something he's willing to do." "Then Derek has made his choice about his priorities." The court set a payment schedule that he agreed to. If he's having trouble meeting his obligations, he needs to adjust his lifestyle, not renegotiate his debts. "Mrs. Simpson, I hope you understand that if Derek's business fails because of cash flow problems, you might not get paid at all." The threat was politely worded, but it was still a threat. Derek was apparently willing to let his business partner imply that my insistence on being repaid, according to the court order, might result in Derek's financial ruin. Michael, Derek's business was successful enough for him to buy a $58,000 boat while owing me money. If it's struggling now, that's because Derek has been making poor financial decisions, not because he's paying back a legitimate debt to his mother. I just thought maybe, as family, you might want to help him succeed. Family. The word that had been used to manipulate me for so many years. The justification for every financial sacrifice I'd made, every boundary I'd dissolved, every time I'd put Derek's wants ahead of my own needs. Michael, Derek's success is not more important than my financial security. I'm 73 years old with limited savings because I spent years helping Derek build the business he's now claiming is threatened by having to pay me back. If he wants my help beyond what the court has already ordered, he can start by treating me like his mother instead of like an obstacle to his lifestyle. What would that look like? The question surprised me. Michael seemed genuinely curious, not just looking for ammunition to use in continued negotiations. It would look like phone calls that aren't about money. It would look like invitations to family events where I'm treated like a welcome guest, instead of an obligation. It would look like Derek acknowledging that taking $60,000 from his elderly mother while claiming to be financially struggling was wrong, regardless of what the court ordered. Has he done any of those things? Derek hasn't spoken to me since the day outside the courthouse. The only communication I receive from him is monthly loan payments, with no note, no acknowledgement, nothing that suggests he sees this as anything other than an annoying business obligation. Michael was quiet for a moment. That's unfortunate. Yes, it is. But it's Derek's choice. He's decided that his pride is more important than his relationship with his mother. He's decided that admitting he was wrong about taking advantage of my generosity is worse than losing me entirely. And you're okay with that? I'm not okay with it, Michael. It breaks my heart, but I'm not willing to sacrifice my financial security or my self-respect to maintain a relationship with someone who only values me for what I can give him. After Michael hung up, I sat in my apartment thinking about the conversation. Derek was apparently still trying to find ways to avoid the consequences of his choices, still looking for angles and leverage points that might allow him to maintain his lifestyle without honoring his obligations to me. But what struck me most was that he'd been willing to involve his business partner in trying to renegotiate his debt to his mother. He'd been willing to let Michael know that he was struggling to pay back money he'd borrowed from a family member. That suggested a level of desperation I hadn't expected, and it made me wonder what other financial pressures Derek might be facing. 2 days later, Tyler called with news that confirmed my suspicions. Grandma, I think Dad and Mom might be getting divorced. My heart sank. What makes you think that? They've been fighting a lot. Mostly about money. Mom keeps saying that Dad's financial problems are affecting the whole family, and Dad keeps saying that if certain people weren't demanding money from him, they wouldn't have problems. Certain people. Derek couldn't even bring himself to refer to me as his mother when complaining about having to repay his debts. Tyler, I'm sorry you're having to deal with this. It's not your fault, Grandma. I know Dad borrowed money from you and promised to pay it back. I've seen the papers. What's happening between him and Mom is because of choices Dad made, not because of anything you did. The maturity in Tyler's voice was both impressive and heartbreaking. At 17, he was demonstrating more understanding of accountability and consequences than his father had shown at 45. Are you okay? Do you need anything? I'm okay. But Grandma, can I ask you something? If Dad and Mom do get divorced, and if Dad doesn't have as much money, are you still going to make him pay you back? It was a fair question, and a complicated one. If Derek's marriage was falling apart because of financial stress, and if part of that financial stress was due to the loan payments he was making to me, then continuing to collect those payments might contribute to further family disruption. But Derek's financial stress wasn't really about the loan payments. It was about his refusal to adjust his lifestyle to accommodate his obligations. He was still paying for the boat, still maintaining the expensive house, still sending his kids to private school, still living beyond his means, and then complaining about having to honor his debts. Tyler, the court ordered your father to pay me back because he borrowed money from me and didn't repay it voluntarily. Whether he's married or divorced doesn't change the fact that he owes me money, and it doesn't change my need to have that money for my own security. So you're not going to let him off the hook? Tyler, if your father had come to me a year ago and said, "Mom, I made some mistakes with money, and I need help figuring out how to pay you back without destroying my family," I would have worked with him. If he'd acknowledged that taking advantage of my generosity was wrong and shown some remorse for how he'd treated me, I would have been flexible about payment terms. But he didn't do that. No, he didn't. Instead, he hired a lawyer to claim that he'd never borrowed money from me at all. He tried to convince people that I was mentally incompetent. He lied to you about who had been supporting whom financially. He chose to fight rather than to take responsibility. And now it's too late? I thought about the question carefully. Was it too late for Derek to repair our relationship? Was it too late for him to approach this situation with humility and honesty, instead of continued manipulation and blame? It's not too late for your father to do the right thing, Tyler. But the right thing isn't asking me to forgive his debts so he can maintain a lifestyle he can't afford. The right thing is acknowledging what he did wrong, making whatever lifestyle adjustments he needs to make to honor his obligations, and treating me like his mother instead of like an enemy. Do you think he'll ever do that? I don't know, I hope so, but I'm not going to sacrifice my own well-being waiting for it to happen. 3 months later, the divorce rumors proved accurate. Derek and Nicole separated, and the house in Maple Heights went up for sale. Tyler and Emma moved in with Nicole temporarily, while Derek looked for a smaller place he could afford on his reduced income. Cassandra called to tell me about the separation, her voice carefully neutral. "I thought you should know what's happening with Derek, even though I know you two aren't speaking. How are Tyler and Emma handling it?" "Better than expected, actually. I think they're relieved that the fighting has stopped. And Tyler seems excited about Derek having to sell the boat." "Derek's selling the boat?" "He doesn't have a choice. The divorce settlement is going to require him to liquidate most of his assets to split them with Nicole. The boat, the motorcycle, probably some of his business equipment too." I felt a complicated mix of emotions. I wasn't happy that Derek's marriage had failed, but I couldn't help noting the irony that he was finally being forced to make the lifestyle adjustments he could have made voluntarily a year earlier. How is he taking it? Not well. He's been complaining to anyone who will listen that this all started when you decided to sue him for money he gave you out of the goodness of his heart. Even now, even facing the dissolution of his marriage and the loss of his assets, Derek was still telling people that he had given me money, rather than acknowledging that I had loaned money to him. He was still playing the victim, still rewriting history to avoid taking responsibility for his choices. "Cassandra, you know that's not what happened." "Of course I know that. I was there, I saw the documentation, I was in court when the judge ruled in your favor." But Derek seems to have convinced himself that his version is true. People believe what they need to believe to protect their self-image. I guess so. But Verda, I want you to know that this divorce isn't your fault. Derek's been making bad financial decisions for years. The loan payments to you were just the thing that finally made it impossible for him to keep juggling everything else. Thank you for saying that. I mean it. You had every right to expect repayment for money you loaned him. The fact that he couldn't afford to pay you back while maintaining his lifestyle just proves that his lifestyle was unsustainable. 2 weeks later, I received a phone call from Derek himself. It was the first time we'd spoken since the courthouse confrontation over a year earlier. "Mom, I wanted to let you know that I'm going to have to modify the payment schedule the court set up." "What kind of modification?" "The divorce is requiring me to liquidate assets, and my income is going to be reduced significantly. I can't afford to keep making the full monthly payments." "Derek, you agreed to the payment schedule the court established." "I agreed to it when I thought I'd be able to maintain my income level. Things have changed." "You mean your lifestyle has changed?" "My circumstances have changed. I'm going to be living in a 2-bedroom apartment and driving a 10-year-old car. I think that qualifies as having made some sacrifices." Sacrifices. Derek considered it a sacrifice to live the way most people lived, to drive the kind of car most people drove, to rent an apartment instead of owning a house with a mortgage that required 2 incomes to sustain. "Derek, I've been living in a 1-bedroom apartment and driving a 12-year-old car for years while you were living in a $500,000 house and buying boats. Don't talk to me about sacrifices. That's different. You chose to live that way. I chose to live that way because I gave most of my money to you and Cassandra. We didn't ask you to impoverish yourself. You didn't stop me either. And you didn't think twice about taking the money when I offered it. There was a long pause before Derek spoke again. Look, I'm not calling to fight with you. I'm calling to work out a realistic payment plan that I can actually stick to. What are you proposing? Half payments for the next year while I get my finances stabilized, then we can revisit the full payment schedule. Derek, you've had over a year to stabilize your finances. Instead, you chose to maintain an expensive lifestyle while making minimum payments to me. Why should I believe that giving you more time and lower payments will result in anything different? Because I don't have a choice anymore. The divorce settlement is forcing me to live within my means whether I want to or not. You always had the choice to live within your means, Derek. You just preferred to live within my means instead. The conversation ended without any agreement about modified payments, but Derek's situation had clarified something important for me. He was finally experiencing the financial pressure that most people lived with every day, the pressure of having to make choices between wants and needs, the pressure of having to prioritize obligations over luxuries. It had taken a divorce and court-ordered asset liquidation to force Derek into the same kind of budgeting and sacrifice that I'd been doing voluntarily for years while supporting his lifestyle. And even now, even facing these consequences, he was still looking for ways to avoid full accountability for his debt to me. But I was no longer the same person who had written checks whenever her children asked. I was no longer willing to sacrifice my security for their comfort. I was no longer confused about the difference between helping and enabling, between loving and being used. Derek would pay back what he owed me according to the schedule the court had established, or he would face the legal consequences of defaulting on a court judgment. His marriage, his lifestyle, his financial stress, none of that was my responsibility to fix. My responsibility was to myself, to the financial security I'd finally started to rebuild, to the self-respect I'd finally learned to value. The leftovers were truly gone now, replaced by something much more substantial. The knowledge that I deserved better than scraps of attention and consideration, and the strength to demand it even when demanding it was uncomfortable. Some lessons take 73 years to learn, but once learned, they change everything. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.